Coming in at number 10, we have the Iron Goblin. Coming from an alternate universe where the Spider Island event wound up being permanent, Tony Stark was initially transformed into a human-spider hybrid under the control of the villainous Spider-Queen. During a battle with the Resistance, however, Tony was sprayed with the same goblin formula that had corrupted the mind of Norman Osborn, transforming Tony Stark into the Iron Goblin, with a mechanical new costume to match. And while this version of Tony would eventually decide to sacrifice himself in a last moment of humanity before his goblin insanity fully took over, the combination of Iron Man and Green Goblin tech is still a pretty terrifying combo that Spider-Man should hope never reappears. Coming in at number 9, we have the corrupted Iron Man from the controversial 90s event, The Crossing. When a variant of the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves, Iron Man became a sleeper agent within the Avengers and eventually attacked his companions outright after secretly manipulating them for years. While eventually defeated by a time-traveling 19-year-old version of himself, and then retconned into Tony going back to his usual status quo in the Marvel Universe, this controversial storyline shows what would happen if Iron Man truly turned out to be a traitor. Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Thor. During the event that saw God Emperor Doom in control of a Marvel universe converted into a new Battleworld, Doom maintained his complete control over the many realms of Battleworld with a police force army known as the Thor Corps. One of the most powerful of Doom's personal army was the being known as Iron Thor, wearing a combination of the Iron Man armor and Thor's iconic helmet, and investigating any potential rebellions to his master Doom's rule. Even capable of wielding Mjolnir, this super powerful character still managed to be murdered by the hero Warrior Woman as an example of rebellion against Emperor Doom. He might have had a short life, but man, I really love that Iron Thor design.
Number 7, Mutant Captain America. This version of Captain America was a mutant who ended up replacing the original Captain America after he died in a Sentinel attack. He wasn't just given the mantle of Cap either, but also ended up receiving the Super Soldier Serum. He had this and his own mutant powers besides, which made him pretty crazy powerful. Although the mutant version of Cap had good intentions, his powers were somewhat uncontrollable, which was a big problem. His powers going haywire was what ended up causing the death of his own group, the Six, and the Avengers, who he was at the time fighting against. This caused him to lose his sanity, turning him into a full-on villain and a loose cannon, who attacked and defeated pretty much everyone who came after him, except Havoc, who managed to successfully kill and defeat the crazed mutant version of Captain America. Poor mutant Captain America, it sounds like it was a rough go, you know? Number 6, Zombie Colonel America. What's worse than a werewolf Cap? A zombie Cap, obviously. This is the version of Captain America that we get in the Marvel Zombieverse. Although really, this isn't Captain America as a zombie, it's Colonel America, because that is Steve Rogers' hero mantle in this reality. Here, Colonel America was infected and turned into a zombie during that first confrontation with the zombified Sentry, which the Avengers responded to in downtown New York. Zombie Cap was responsible for turning Spider-Man into a zombie, biting him after he himself was infected. He was one of the zombies to fight against the villains for who should get the remains of Galactus' corpse, and of course with it the power Cosmic, which would enable them to travel to other worlds, which they then could devour. However, Zombie Cap was defeated by his nemesis, a zombified Red Skull. So, no power Cosmic for him. He dead. He's double dead. Really. Number 5, William Burnside. William Burnside was the Captain America of the 1950s, who ended up being retconned to not actually be Steve Rogers at all, although he was a man who believed he was Steve Rogers. This version of Captain America was later revealed to be William Burnside initially, a man who was hired to replace Captain America after he went missing in World War II. This version of Captain America was racist and extremely anti-communist, echoing the McCarthy communist witch hunts of those times. Burnside legally changed his name to Steven Rogers and would have an extended lifespan thanks to a version of the Super Soldier Serum that he was exposed to. However, because this was not a perfected version of the serum, it apparently would also cause him to become more extreme over time as his psyche and mind degraded as a result, so made him pretty crazy and pretty evil. Number 4, Evil Clone. An evil clone with the mind of Red Skull. To be honest, This has happened multiple times in the comics, where Red Skull has ended up having his consciousness, his personality, or his memories, or some combination of those, into the clone of Steve Rogers. It's happened both in the main continuity and in alternate universes. For this version though, we're going to be talking about issue 350 of Captain America, where the Red Skull in Steven Rogers' clone body ends up being the mastermind behind the whole commission / Walker kerfuffle that we talked about earlier on this list. His plan this time around in a Steve Rogers clone body is to discard his previous ideologies and use capitalism itself to dismantle the democracy of America and destroy the nation from the inside out. It doesn't work out in the end, and the issue ends with him facing off against both John Walker and the Captain and becoming deformed once more by the red dust of death. But he did try it. He did try. And don't worry, he would come back in more clone bodies. That's how he do.
Coming in at number 3, we have Obadiah Stane, aka the Ironmonger in the very first Iron Man film. It's become a bit of a meme at this point that many of the supervillains of the MCU are dark reflections of the same powers and personalities as the heroes they're opposing, and the Ironmonger is the origin of that trope in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Completely guilt-free about selling weapons to all sides, Stane is a ruthless businessman willing to do anything to maintain control of Stark Industries, and shows just how awful Tony's new technology could be used in the wrong hands, and what a monster he could become if he gave up on his deepest morals. Although, honestly, the fact that his idea of upgrading the Iron Man suit is just to make the original one bigger, maybe he's not quite as smart as Tony after all. Coming in at number 2, we have the evil Emperor Stark. Hailing from the destroyed world of Earth 42777, this version of Iron Man was perhaps the cruelest the multiverse had ever seen, as he manipulated Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants into declaring war on humanity, then used the resulting anti-mutant backlash to secure power as the world's only superhero. Holding entire countries hostage with natural disasters and even spreading plagues among his own citizens, this version of Tony declared himself Emperor Stark, taking the cloak of Dr. Doom as a final trophy. This was Iron Man at his most evil, and he was an incredibly powerful threat when encountered by the multiverse-traveling Exiles, only eventually defeated by his own universe's last superhero survivor, Sue Storm. A tragic end for a tragic villain. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Zombie Iron Man. When Earth 2149 was first hit by the zombie plague that's since been highlighted in multiple Marvel spin-off series, this version of Iron Man attempted to use teleportation technology to escape to a different universe with Nick Fury. However, a zombified Fantastic Four arrived too quickly for this plan, and Tony was bitten, becoming a living corpse inside his metal armor and developing a bloodlust and pure hunger for human flesh. Still surviving even after having his legs blasted off by the Silver Surfer, the zombified Iron Man would go on to lead the rest of the undead heroes and villains in an attack against Galactus and gain this universe's power cosmic, meaning he could now pursue more flesh throughout the entire universe and bring the zombie plague to the rest of the doomed cosmos.
Number 10, Symbiote Spider-Man. While technically still 616 Peter Parker, Symbiote Spider-Man could be considered an alternate in the sense that it was a very specific version of Peter, or a very specific time in his life where he took to using more brutal and violent tactics to deal with criminals. This was of course brought upon by the alien symbiote who had bonded to Peter and who he had mistaken for just being a new suit initially. Eventually, Spider-Man in his black suit realized that the suit itself was alive and had kind of taken him over. He fought hard, sought out help, and would eventually become separated from the suit, who otherwise did not wish to leave him. In so doing, Spider-Man would unwillingly create an even worse villain in Venom, at least initially. Venom might be a hero now, but of course he did not start out that way, instead being a determined and relentless enemy to Spider-Man in his early years in the comics, who also sometimes was prone to cannibalistic tendencies and threats. Number 9, Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is an alternate version of Spider-Man who actually hails from the reality of Earth 616 as well. Superior Spider-Man was the name given to Otto Octavius' version of Spider-Man, which came about after a plot to steal Spider-Man's body was successful successful. Otto's body was failing, and so he decided to live on by swapping bodies with Peter Parker, which meant that Peter's consciousness ended up dying in Otto's failing body, while Otto's consciousness got to live on inside Peter's young and healthy bod. However, Peter managed to convince Otto to be a hero before he passed away, and so Otto set out to do so, aiming to be a better hero even than Peter had been. Of course, Octavius in the end wasn't really cut out for heroics, although he did do his best. He struggled at times with making the right choices and was also prone to doling out more severe forms of punishment for villains and using more sinister methods when it came to keeping the streets safe. In the end, he chose to relinquish the title and body back to Peter, who still managed to live on via his subconscious, which still remained attached to his original body. And friends, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, be sure to let us know by smashing that like button. I mean, there's definitely a lot of evil Spider-Men out there, so I'm pretty sure we could keep going with this one. Number 8. The CEO. In an alternate 2099 reality we see explored in the video game Spider-Man Edge of Time, Peter-Man actually ends up being the big villain. In this reality, Peter goes on to become the CEO of Alchemax. His goal was noble, but kinda selfish and also kinda messed up. He hoped to use time gateway technology to channel quantum energy and bring back the lives of all of those that he'd lost. In this reality, Peter Parker was still Spider-Man, but either faked his death or just let everyone believe he had died so he could work behind the scenes as Alchemax's CEO, getting everything in place so that he could eventually put his own plan into motion. This version of Peter ends up getting erased from time after Miguel O'Hara's Spider-Man beats him up and manages to basically reset young Peter's story, thereby convincing Peter to never become the CEO of Alchemax and preventing this evil future self from ever existing.
Coming in at number 7, we have the Steel Corps. Hailing from Earth 11326, this version of Iron Man was pretty similar to our own, but with two key differences. He's permanently fused with his suit, and he absolutely hates mutants. Fighting alongside other villainous Avengers to wipe out this universe's X-Men, this Iron Man's natural body died long ago after being melded with his machinery, and thus he jokingly calls himself the Steel Corpse as a way of coping with his morbid situation. This version of Iron Man had complete mastery of his weaponry, as they were literally a part of his body, and only a last-second change of heart before sacrificing himself stops this Tony Stark from being one of the absolute worst. Coming in at number 6, we have the infamous Iron Patriot, aka Norman Osborn. Best known as being the alter ego of Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn has long been one of the biggest threats in the Marvel Universe, manipulating events from afar as the CEO of Oscorp. Following the invasion of Earth by the Skrull army, Norman found himself suddenly in the public eye and with goodwill after being the one to personally defeat the Skrull Queen. Norman would use this influence to lead the Dark Avengers as the Iron Patriot, a twisted version of Iron Man combined with Captain America's patriotism that tricked the public into trusting Norman, and showing that Tony Stark is definitely not the worst billionaire in the Marvel world. Coming in at number 5, we have the Iron Maniac. On the dark alternate world of Earth 5012, most of the superheroes of this reality are dead after an unknown fatal error made by Reed Richards. A vengeful and violent Tony Stark makes it his life's mission to get revenge on Reed and modifies his armor to resemble that of Reed's worst enemy, Doctor Doom. This insane version of Iron Man killed the Human Torch and was eventually banished to the main Marvel universe, where he had to be subdued by the combined efforts of Spider-Man, Captain America, and Black Widow, who found it a bit unnerving to be fighting such a far-gone version of one of their closest allies. This Tony was just as resourceful as the real one, however, as he'd even escape custody by building a new suit from the remains of a life model decoy. Pretty resourceful for an insane Iron Man. Coming in at number 4, we have the superior Iron Man. During an event known as Axis, many Marvel heroes and villains had their morality completely inverted, with good guys becoming bad, bad guys becoming good, and so on and so forth. One of the few changes that wasn't reversed by the end of the event, however, was the morality of Iron Man, who in his evil form still possessed all of the intelligence and dark aspects of Tony's personality, and managed to build a shield for himself to prevent being turned into a hero again. infecting much of the planet with a new version of the Extremis virus and using artificially intelligent drones to assert his dominance, this version of Tony was only finally cured by the Marvel Universe's collapse into battle worlds resetting his morals, meaning that this was a villain that the rest of the Avengers didn't even manage to properly defeat.
Number 3. Pestilence. Pestilence hails from an alternate AOA, Age of Apocalypse reality, the reality of Earth 5701. Here, Spider-Man ends up being chosen to become one of Apocalypse's 4 Horsemen of Death. He takes on the role of Pestilence, and this much more evil version of the character, allied with mutant supervillain Apocalypse, also really looks the part too. He has fangs, which are poisonous, and 6 arms, really looking more like a Spider-Man than most of his heroic counterparts typically do. Here, Peter was actually chosen to become one of Apocalypse's 4 Horsemen because he was considered so inherently good at heroics and as a person, I imagine. Apocalypse chose heroes he identified as the best among them to become his horsemen in this reality. Number 2. Spider Doppelganger. The Doppelganger, or more specifically, the Spider Doppelganger, or the Spider-Man Doppelganger if you want, was originally an enemy created by the Magus during the Infinity War event. He was one of the many evil doppelgangers created to fight against the superhero community, which opposed Magus in the conflict. Although, like many of the other doppelgangers, the Spider-Man Doppelganger would die during Infinity War. He wouldn't stay dead though, as so many of the other doppels had. Instead, Spider Doppelganger ended up being resurrected by Demogoblin and would end up joining with him for a time, acting as his sidekick and being treated kinda like his pet. Spider Doppelganger would also go on to team up with such villainous spider enemies as Carnage and Shriek. In fact, he'd actually become for a time very close and loyal to Shriek, who treated him as though he were her own son. Number 1. Norman Osborn. On the reality of Earth 44145 lives a version of Norman Osborn who becomes imbued with spider-like powers and abilities. Of course, this being Norman, he decides to use said power in his pursuit of more power, not inherently being the hero type. Peter Parker, who used to work for Norman, reveals his plan to Norman's son and Peter's friend Harry in a letter. This leads to Peter's death, which in turn motivates Harry to fight his father. Norman Osborn as Spider-Man would go on to team up with Superior Spider-Man and Spiders-Man briefly during the Spider-Geddon event, but would end up partnered solely with Spiders-Man after suggesting that to defeat the Inheritors, they simply trap them on Earth 616. Obviously, as that was Superior Spider-Man's homeworld, he was not really down for this plan. Number 10. Jonathan Walker. U.S. agent might be a hero now in the comics, but when he started out in the 616 continuity, he was manipulated into becoming a villain. Jonathan Walker was initially known as antagonistic hero Super Patriot, who did his best to discredit Captain America, claiming that he himself stood for the United States' true ideals. As a result of Red Skull's meddling and manipulation, he was appointed to replace Steve Rogers as the new Captain America after Rogers stepped down as the government actually owned the title and refused to let him keep the title if he wasn't going to be working for them. As Captain America, Walker took a very extreme and violent approach that put him into direct conflict with Rogers, who was currently going by the mantle of the Captain. In the end, the Captain defeated Walker, and after Skull's involvement in the ordeal was revealed, the two ended up teaming up to take him down, starting off on Walker's path to redemption as hero U.S. agent. Number 9. Capwolf. Werewolf Captain America isn't as much an alternate version of Cap as it is a distinct moment in Cap's history where he happened to be transformed into a werewolf. Captain America ends up becoming a werewolf while on the trail of Colonel John Jameson, who had gone missing. Captain America himself had reason to suspect that something awful had happened to Jameson, who it seemed may be plagued by his wolf side once more. Jameson was known in the past for operating as Man-Wolf. It seemed as though a wolf-like creature or werewolf was responsible for a series of murders. In the end, however, Cap's trail ended up leading him into a much more complex and disturbing plot where a villain was attempting to use a recreated Werewolf by Night wolf serum to turn people into werewolves. Captain America became one of their victims and for a time became a werewolf himself. Granted, he was still a hero at this point, but werewolves in general are considered to be somewhat uncontrollable monsters who are at least occasionally ruled by their own bloodlust. So I think we can at least partially count Capwolf. Also, I needed to complete the monster trifecta. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Captain America lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. MCU U.S. Agents. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, U.S. Agent John Walker accidentally becomes an evil version of Captain America without really intending to do that. Really, it's more complicated than him just being straight up evil, as it is with most Marvel Cinematic Universe antagonists. Walker really wants to do right by the Captain America mantle and do it justice. He's a soldier who has worked super hard to earn this title, but also, although his heart might be in the right place, that doesn't mean that he knows the best way to approach replacing Cap or doing right by his legacy. Walker ends up becoming misguided as a result of dealing with so much disrespect from those around him, and as a result of him not being, as powerful as Cap would be, because he doesn't have the super soldier serum. He realizes that being chosen and respected as the new Captain America by the government doesn't necessarily mean that the people of the United States will also respect you, nor that Steve's actual allies and friends will respect you as his replacement either. After he loses his own best friend, Lamar Hoskins, he becomes completely fed up with trying to figure out how to do what's right, and instead decides to do what he feels needs to be done. This makes him much more violent and much more dangerous, turning him into an enemy of Falcon and Winter Soldier, and leading the government to later on remove his title, his honors, and basically just overall dismiss him. Fortunately, the US agent still found a place on what will likely be either the MCU Thunderbolts or Dark Avengers team. TBD, or at least to be declared, if not to be determined. Number 7. Asset 42. Asset 42 was likely one of the first clones ever made by the Assessor of Miles Morales. This clone was considered to be a burner clone and only lasted a few issues, but what a roller coaster of a ride those few issues he appeared in were. This evil version of Miles Morales first appeared in issue 17 of the Miles Morales Spider-Man series, and shortly thereafter perished in a fight against Miles. Miles seemingly kills Asset 42 in this fight, but in reality the clone was revealed to have only really been made to last for about a day. So it's highly likely that even without fighting Miles, he would have just died, as he was already breaking down and basically turning into liquid-like goo, as is evident in his final fight against the original one and only Miles Morales. Asset 42 was in league with Ultimatum and helped to kidnap the real Miles for that villain. Number 6. Ultimatum. Ultimatum is an evil alternate version of hero and Spider-Man Miles Morales. Or really, he's the main counterpart to Miles, who hails from Earth 1610, the Ultimate Universe. Ultimatum is the version of Miles that existed on Earth 616, his 616 counterpart. 616 Miles was a criminal who allied himself with the Kingpin. Growing up and belonging to a crime family, he proved his loyalty to Wilson Fisk and was permitted by the Kingpin to later on retire, because he was so loyal. However, after his wife died, he decided to do what Kingpin himself had ultimately decided against when it came to his dead wife Vanessa, to find an alternate version of her in the multiverse who was alive so that he could reunite with her. Miles ended up in the reality of Earth 1610 as a result. Eventually, he would return to Earth 616, only to find that Miles of 1610 had emigrated there. Ultimatum at this point decided to set things right and planned to send Miles and his family back to 1610, taking back his rightful place as the Miles Morales of 616, and aiming to become a prominent criminal and villain in New York thereafter. Number 5. Slim. Recently, Miles Morales got his own clone saga in his series Miles Morales Spider-Man. It turned out that the Assessor had made clones of Miles after capturing and studying him. This batch of clones was unstable, and after escaping were on the hunt to find a cure using any means necessary. Salim was sort of like the leader among them, and he ended up at odds with Spider-Man Miles and Spider-Man Peter. Due to being raised while rapidly aging by the Assessor, Salim and his brothers were kinda messed up and kinda misguided and kinda evil. They inherently struck out at Miles and Peter when the two groups of Spider-Men crossed one another's paths. After Miles mistook their found cure for a serum to make more clones and ended up destroying it, Salim decided to kidnap Miles' baby sister, Billy, in order to lure Miles to him. With only a few hours left to live, Salim wanted to face Miles, hoping to prove that he had successfully been created to be the superior version of him, despite being otherwise unstable and defective, as so many clones have been and often are. Number 4. Kraven the Hunter. It's not just Doc Ock who's taking a swing at web slinging when it comes to Spider-Man's rogues gallery. Kraven also once decided to step into Peter's shoes and become Spider-Man for a short time. This was during Kraven's last hunt, when Kraven seemingly had killed Peter and then took his place to prove that he was the better between the two. Kraven's approach to heroics was even more brutal in my opinion than Otto's, with many villains ending up fatally injured after Kraven attempted to get rid of them. In the end, it was revealed that Spider-Man wasn't actually dead, dead, but had simply been given a drug to put him in a hibernation-like state after Kraven had disposed of him. Eventually he was able to rise from the grave and return only to find out that Kraven had been making a mess of the Spider-Man mantle by adopting it in his absence. Kraven would end up basically surrendering, content with his last hunt, believing that he'd accomplished everything he had set out to do in his life. This story and Kraven's time as Spider-Man ends with him taking his own life. But don't worry, this is comics, so of course Kraven would be back. Number 3. Vampire King. This version of Captain America comes from the Exile series, where he becomes King of the Vampires. In the alternate reality of Earth 3931 during World War II, by Baron Blood. Baron Blood turns him into a vampire. Vampire Cap is definitely not a good dude. Likely the most evil of all the monstrous Captain Americas listed here, this version of Captain America has his own sinister version of the Avengers and Thralls, who he enlists and forces to fight for him. However, he still proves to be no match for the Exiles, who end up defeating and decapitating him in the end. Number 2. President Red Skull. Not an alternate version of Steve Rogers, but an alternate version of Red Skull who beat Rogers and took to wearing his Captain America suit off and around his new redecorated Oval Office. This alternate version of Red Skull comes from the Old Man Logan universe, where Red Skull ends up appointing himself the new President of the U.S., which he renames America. America with a K. Red Skull ends up not just defeating Captain America, but also almost all of the superhero community when he manages to rally together an impossible to defeat force of supervillains who coordinate their attack on the nation. Being that he's Red Skull, he's probably one of the most evil versions of Captain America out there because he's Red Skull, although like I said, he's not fully a Cap ultimately, but he definitely evil, and he does wear that suit a lot. Number 1. Hydra Supreme. This alternate version of Captain America was initially retconned to be the version of Captain America. Steven Rogers ended up being revealed as a Hydra sleeper agent in one of the biggest twists in comic book history. All his heroic actions had apparently just been Steve buying time and building trust so that he'd be in the perfect position to take over the US and could then reveal his true colors. Hail Hydra to this day is one of the most iconic lines ever uttered by the supposed hero. However, it all turned out that this version of Cap wasn't the real Steve Rogers of 616. Instead, what happened was Kobik, the sentient living version of the Cosmic Cube, was convinced by Red Skull that reality should be warped so that Cap could become an agent of Hydra. When this happened, the real heroic version of Captain America ended up trapped within a shard of the Cosmic Cube, and the now altered version of the character took his place in the reality of 616. In the end, the true Cap would be freed from the shard and would end up fighting and defeating his evil Hydra Supreme alternate version. And if you're worried, don't worry, the shard was made bigger, so it wasn't like little tiny Cap running around.
Coming in at number 10, we have the Iron Goblin. Coming from an alternate universe where the Spider Island event wound up being permanent, Tony Stark was initially transformed into a human-spider hybrid under the control of the villainous Spider Queen. During a battle with the Resistance, however, Tony was sprayed with the same goblin formula that had corrupted the mind of Norman Osborn, transforming Tony Stark into the Iron Goblin, with a mechanical new costume to match. And while this version of Tony would eventually decide to sacrifice himself in a last moment of humanity before his goblin insanity fully took over, the combination of Iron Man and Green Goblin tech is still a pretty terrifying combo that Spider-Man should hope never reappears. Coming in at number 9, we have the corrupted Iron Man from the controversial 90s event, The Crossing. When a variant of the time-traveling villain Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves, Iron Man became a sleeper agent within the Avengers and eventually attacked his companions outright after secretly manipulating them for years. While eventually defeated by a time-traveling 19-year-old version of himself, and then retconned into Tony going back to his usual status quo in the Marvel Universe, this controversial storyline shows what would happen if Iron Man truly turned out to be a traitor. Coming in at number 8, we have Iron Thor. During the event that saw God Emperor Doom in control of a Marvel universe converted into a new Battleworld, Doom maintained his complete control over the many realms of Battleworld with a police force army known as the Thor Corps. One of the most powerful of Doom's personal army was the being known as Iron Thor, wearing a combination of the Iron Man armor and Thor's iconic helmet, and investigating any potential rebellions to his master Doom's rule. Even capable of wielding Mjolnir, this super powerful character still managed to be murdered by the hero Warrior Woman as an example of rebellion against Emperor Doom. He might have had a short life, but man, I really love that Iron Thor design. Coming in at number 7, we have the Steel Corpse. Hailing from Earth 11326, this version of Iron Man was pretty similar to our own, but with two key differences. He's permanently fused with his suit, and he absolutely hates mutants. Fighting alongside other villainous Avengers to wipe out this universe's X-Men, this Iron Man's natural body died long ago after being melded with his machinery, and thus he jokingly calls himself the Steel Corpse as a way of coping with his morbid situation. This version of Iron Man had complete mastery of his weaponry, as they were literally a part of his body, and only a last-second change of heart before sacrificing himself stops this Tony Stark from being one of the absolute worst. Coming in at number 6, we have the infamous Iron Patriot, aka Norman Osborn. Best known as being the alter ego of Spider-Man's nemesis, the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn has long been one of the biggest threats in the Marvel Universe, manipulating events from afar as the CEO of Oscorp. Following the invasion of Earth by the Skrull army, Norman found himself suddenly in the public eye and with goodwill after being the one to personally defeat the Skrull Queen. Norman would use this influence to lead the Dark Avengers as the Iron Patriot, a twisted version of Iron Man combined with Captain America's patriotism that tricked the public into trusting Norman, and showing that Tony Stark is definitely not the worst billionaire in the Marvel world.
Number 5, Injustice Superman. The Superman of the Injustice universe has pretty much the same history as the baseline Superman, but when the Joker kidnaps the pregnant Lois Lane, it lures Superman into a trap of fear gas. In his poisoned state, Superman hallucinates his true love as the villain Doomsday and instantly attacks, flying Lois and his unborn child into space, killing them, and inadvertently causing a nuclear bomb to destroy his city, Metropolis. After suddenly losing his city, wife, and baby, Superman goes into an honestly understandable rage, bursting into the interrogation room where Batman is learning the true intentions of the Joker and plunges his super fist right through the guy's chest. Following these events, Superman takes control of the Earth and rules it as a tyrant. Fortunately, Batman forms an insurgency to try and beat this corrupted Superman, eventually enlisting the aid of another Earth's Justice League, and I guess technically whoever plays the tied-in video game, to defeat him and save the day.
Coming in at number 4, we have the superior Iron Man. During an event known as Axis, many Marvel heroes and villains had their morality completely inverted, with good guys becoming bad, bad guys becoming good, and so on and so forth. One of the few changes that wasn't reversed by the end of the event, however, was the morality of Iron Man, who in his evil form still possessed all of the intelligence and dark aspects of Tony's personality, and managed to build a shield for himself to prevent being turned into a hero again. Infecting much of the planet with a new version of the Extremis virus, and using artificially intelligent drones to assert his dominance, this version of Tony was only finally cured by the Marvel Universe's collapse into Battleworld resetting his morals, meaning that this was a villain that the rest of the Avengers didn't even manage to properly defeat. Coming in at number 3, we have Obadiah Stane, aka the Iron Monger in the very first Iron Man film. It's become a bit of a meme at this point that many of the supervillains of the MCU are dark reflections of the same powers and personalities as the heroes they're opposing, and the Ironmonger is the origin of that trope in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Completely guilt-free about selling weapons to all sides, Stane is a ruthless businessman willing to do anything to maintain control of Stark Industries, and shows just how awful Tony's new technology could be used in the wrong hands, and what a monster he could become if he gave up on his deepest morals. Although, honestly, the fact that his idea of upgrading the Iron Man suit is just to make the original one bigger, maybe he's not quite as smart as Tony after all. Coming in at number 2, we have the evil Emperor Stark. Hailing from the destroyed world of Earth 42777, this version of Iron Man was perhaps the cruelest the multiverse had ever seen, as he manipulated Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants into declaring war on humanity, then used the resulting anti-mutant backlash to secure power as the world's only superhero. Holding entire countries hostage with natural disasters and even spreading plagues among his own citizens, this version of Tony declared himself Emperor Stark, taking the cloak of Dr. Doom as a final trophy. This was Iron Man at his most evil, and he was an incredibly powerful threat when encountered by the multiverse-traveling Exiles, only eventually defeated by his own universe's last superhero survivor, Sue Storm. A tragic end for a tragic villain. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Zombie Iron Man. When Earth 2149 was first hit by the zombie plague that's since been highlighted in multiple Marvel spin-off series, this version of Iron Man attempted to use teleportation technology to escape to a different universe with Nick Fury. However, a zombified Fantastic Four arrived too quickly for this plan, and Tony was bitten, becoming a living corpse inside his metal armor and developing a bloodlust and pure hunger for human flesh. Still surviving even after having his legs blasted off by the Silver Surfer, the zombified Iron Man would go on to lead the rest of the undead heroes and villains in an attack against Galactus and gain this universe's power cosmic, meaning he could now pursue more flesh throughout the entire universe and bring the zombie plague to the rest of the doomed cosmos.
Number 10, Dark Multiverse Superman. Now, I don't know if this is laziness, but the Dark Universe version of Superman doesn't really get much justification as to why his mind snapped and he killed millions of people, his own family, and most of the other superheroes. The Batman of this universe, after seeing this Superman kill his own wife, and after he cuts off Batman's arm, decides that this guy just ain't it. And he transformed himself into a doomsday Batman hybrid called the Devastator, and smashed down this Superman, poisoned him, and impaled him on spikes. A quick evil Superman story, but it was in service of an amazing Batman story. Number 9, Lex Luthor Superman. Okay, this evil Superman isn't technically Superman, but when Superman and Doomsday are both killed by each other, Earth Prime's Lex Luthor returns to Earth after getting bored of being the new Darkseid on Apokolips, and learns of Superman's demise. Lex Luthor, with the help of a superpowered armor, steps in and makes himself the new Superman. I mean, not really Lex, but sure, we'll just give this one to you. Now, he had some good intentions, but it's Lex Luthor. He wasn't exactly the best person for the job. After having multiple falling outs with the new real Superman, pre-Flashpoint Clark Kent, he gave up the title of Superman and started acting as an independent hero, and sometimes a villain. Number 8, Parallax Superman. In this story, Parallax, the physical embodiment of fear, took over the body of Kal-El, making him submit to Laxi by torturing children, and uses this Kryptonian's powers to confront Sinestro, who traps the cocky super entity and teleports him to the caves of Quard, where Sinestro tries to take Parallax out of Superman's body for his own evil plans. But surprise! Parallax has already escaped Superman's body, and a battle ensues between Sinestro and Parallax, leading to the surface of Quard. Superman escapes from the caves, and in a last-ditch attempt to defeat the entity, steals Sinestro's power ring and coerces Parallax to swallow his super butt whole. Superman is a clever guy though. He traps Parallax inside the power ring and the day is saved. Gosh, a lot of plot twists there. Number 7, Hank Henshaw. Hanky Boy here was already a villain of Superman's from past stories, but when Superman was killed by Doomsday, Hank, unable to directly get revenge against Superman himself, decided to attack his reputation instead. Come on, man. He's already dead. Not cool, dude. Not cool. After creating a Kryptonian cyborg body using the birthing matrix, he took on the guise of Supes and went about destroying Superman's memorial plaque. Then he saved the president to get clout so the president would recognize him as the real Superman. Eventually, he and Mongol destroyed Coast City, and the real reborn Superman, with the help of others, defeated and discredited him. At least he looked really cool. Number 6, Overman. Now this version of our favorite red and blue man didn't end up in Kansas when he was ejected from Krypton. No. This Kal-El found himself in Sudetenland, Germany in 1938 and was acquired by a certain mustached fascist. With Kal and Kryptonian tech, the Reich were obviously able to win World War II and rule over the entire planet. Later, Overman would become disgusted with the stashed man when the Holocaust had been finalized, although he still served the state. It's kind of a weird set of morals there, dude. Eventually, he was cloned and received a love in the form of Overgirl, but after her death, he was completely heartbroken, and he supplied information to the freedom fighters who long opposed the fascists, which eventually led to the death of the new Reichman, the Justice League, and the city of Metropolis. With the grief of all these losses holding him down, he was overthrown by his friend. Damn. Kinda hard to feel bad for him though.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Iron Maniac. On the dark alternate world of Earth 5012, most of the superheroes of this reality are dead after an unknown fatal error made by Reed Richards. A vengeful and violent Tony Stark makes it his life's mission to get revenge on Reed and modifies his armor to resemble that of Reed's worst enemy, Doctor Doom. This insane version of Iron Man killed the Human Torch and was eventually banished to the main Marvel universe, where he had to be subdued by the combined efforts of Spider-Man, Captain America, and Black Widow, who found it a bit unnerving to be fighting such a far-gone version of one of their closest allies. This Tony was just as resourceful as the real one, however, as he'd even escape custody by building a new suit from the remains of a life model decoy. Pretty resourceful for an insane Iron Man.
Number 4, Brutal. Brutal is a cloned version of Superman, but unlike a certain bizarre version of Superman, who we will talk about later, don't worry, this duplication was done by none other than Darkseid himself. He raised the resulting clone into a soldier, nay, a weapon, and unleashed him on the superheroes of Earth 2, along with Steppenwolf and the other Hunger Dogs, but they don't really matter. When Steppenwolf tried to subvert his master Darkseid and take Earth as his own, brutally murders him with his heat vision, establishing his devotion to his Lord Darkseid. Let me make my intentions clear. Hail Darkseid! Which is just a sweet line after you murdered a general of Darkseid. The Earth became lost to Darkseid's minions, and eventually, after a lot of other stuff, Kal-Zod, Earth 2's Superman, faced Brutal in combat, and after a furious battle, showed that Brutal was just an imitation, and a cheap one at that, as his body began to deteriorate, and the day was saved. Again. Hey guys, just wanted to say a quick thanks for watching. We hope you're enjoying the video. If you are, why not head on over to that pretty little subscribe button and give us a follow and a like. You guys are the reason we can even be here in the first place. Love you! Okay, on to the top 3. Number 3, Superdoom. On Earth 45, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, and Clark Kent are scientists instead of reporters, and they use their smarts to build a machine that can turn thoughts into reality, which, I mean, how the heck did they think that was a good idea? I can think of 10 things right now that should never become reality. Anyways, using the aforementioned thought-to-form machine, they try to create a being called Superman, who would be capable of doing amazing things and who could save worlds. But when they are forced to sell their idea to Overcorp, they decide to rebrand and end up creating a monstrosity. Superman, the Last Night of Tomorrow, or Superdoom. With a corporate-fueled agenda of destroying all competition, Superdoom quickly becomes the strongest super being on its own planet, and then enters the bleed space to murder all other versions of Superman. Of course, bad guys never win forever, so after defeating and devouring multiple different Supermen of multiple different Earths, he was stopped by the Superman and Lex Luthor of Earth 22, who stranded him between universes. He's since been used in a few other storylines and remains one of the most formidable evil versions of Superman to this day. I mean, he didn't even die. Number 2, Bizarro. When Lex Luthor gets the plans for a device called the Duplicator Ray, he modifies the device and uses it to try and create a clone of Superman, who will follow his every order without question. But since our Lex can't seem to do anything right, the resulting doppelganger is an unintelligent, unpredictable, backwards version of Superman, eventually known as Bizarro. Bizarro is a main villain for Superman, appearing in many, many stories, and I'm so glad because, gosh, he's just so fun to see! Eventually, Bizarro gets a case of the blues and longs for love, and gets the hots for Lois Lane. Lois isn't really interested, but being the great gal that she is, she uses the duplicator ray on herself, creating a Bizarro Lois Lane. And the two eventually leave Earth to settle another Earth-like planet they fittingly name Bizarro World. Or, and forgive me here, Hydra, which is Earth backwards, which they populate with more and more duplicates of themselves. But don't worry, they have pretty rock necklaces that say Bizarro and Bizarro Lowest 1, so we don't get confused. Number 1, Maestro. Okay, imagine a version of the Hulk with twice his strength who retains the intelligence of Bruce Banner, right? Now take that Hulk and make him a ruthless, tyrannical ruler, and you get Maestro. Maestro is a possible future version of the Hulk who kills literally all the other heroes and villains and names himself emperor over the whole world. Our Hulk first comes into contact with him when Rick Jones's daughter takes him into the future to fight his evil future self. But this Maestro guy, he ain't playing around, okay? In the very first fight, Maestro won by simply snapping Hulk's neck. That's it. Done. Over. And then he waited for Hulk to heal, taunting him and villain monologuing at him the whole time about all the terrible things they go through as the Hulk. The only way our Hulk could win was to bring Maestro back in time to when they gained their abilities, the Gamma Bomb, which destroyed Maestro on the atomic scale. The sheer idea of Maestro haunted Bruce and the Hulk's thoughts for the rest of time, wanting never to become that level of evil. Number 10, Joe Fixit. I think he looks just downright adorable in that suit, but his actions are definitely not adorable. Joe Fixit is essentially the Grey Hulk, which is a weaker, darker Hulk persona that resides inside Bruce's head. Joe is a trickster. He's manipulative, doesn't really care for others. He can drive a car. He has a twin pair of Tommy guns. Oh, and did I mention the suit because he wears a suit? Joe Fixit Hulk took up a job as an enforcer at a casino, which is where all of this mafioso business came from. And he stayed this way for several months, not reverting back into Bruce for the duration of this period. He even had a relationship at this time, like a whole relationship that blossomed and peaked and ended. Mr. Fixit came to an end eventually thanks to the magia. Hey, forget about it though. We're moving on to number 9. Number 9, War Hulk. This version of Hulk came about when the mutant apocalypse promised the Hulk he would remove a piece of shrapnel that was in his brain if he became his War, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This meant that Hulk would be imbued with the power of the Celestials. That's a lot of power! As War, Hulk faced off against both the Absorbing Man and Juggernaut. But what he didn't know was that these two were accompanied by Rick and Janice Jones, Bruce's best and longtime friends. As Hulk was about to kill Juggernaut and the Absorbing Man, Rick jumped in the way, and Hulk got Rick instead, crippling him. The image of his friend, hurt by his own actions, caused Hulk to break of Apocalypse's influence and run away, ashamed of his actions. Number 8, Clut. Clut, which is Hulk backwards, very creative, is basically what happens when the Hulk goes Hulk. He is another one of the evil personalities inside Hulk's head. This version of Hulk has black skin with glowing red scars. He has red demonic eyes, white hair, and big talons. Clut emerges when Hulk reaches a sufficient level of rage, meaning he is more powerful than any other rage-boosted version of the Green Hulk, which is insane if you know about a certain world-breaking version of the character. This version of Hulk is usually suppressed and has only shown up a few times, and not for very long, I might add. He appeared in the Axis storyline where heroes and villains had their moralities switched. Hulk isn't exactly always a good guy, sometimes letting his rage hurt good and bad guys. But since Clut is his opposite, he lets his rage hurt and maim everyone, good and bad, putting even the villains on alert. Look, he just wants to bathe in the blood of the innocents. That's reasonable, right? Number 7, Zombie Hulk. Whoever came up with the Marvel Zombies story deserves a big old round of applause. I don't care how silly it is. You turned Hulk into a hunger monster. Bravo. When Hulk gets infected with the zombie virus, presumably by Reed Richards aboard the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, the already basically unstoppable hero becomes a flesh-consuming zombie. After a while, the Hulk and other zombified heroes consumed Silver Surfer, gaining the power Cosmic, and after modifying that power, soon defeated and consumed Galactus, making them the next Galactus, or Galacti, or whatever. Which kind of makes sense, you know what I mean? Because zombies eat people, and Galactus eats planets. It's kind of like the natural progression of things, right? Using their newfound powers, the zombies traveled through the cosmos, devouring planets as they went. I think my favorite moment, though, would have to be when zombie Thanos calls zombie Hulk out for eating twice as much as everyone else, because, I mean, he's the Hulk, and man's gotta eat. But in return, Hulk calls Thanos Prune Chin. which is just hilarious. Number 6, Guilt Hulk. Yet another split personality or alter ego of Bruce. The Guilt Hulk is very similar to Devil Hulk, who represents his anger, only this version of Hulk represents all the guilt and regret that the Hulk feels for all the horrible things he has done while in his Hulk form, as well as the horrible things done to him as Banner, which ultimately means that this persona is quite a bit stronger than its counterpart. What do I mean by the horrible things done to Banner? Well, apart from being feared and shunned and usually living a very, very lonely life, from a much too young age, Bruce suffered constant abuse from his father, Brian Banner, and this abuse caused all kinds of mental problems for Bruce. The Guilt Hulk, as well as the Devil Hulk, and a few other Evil Hulk alter egos, are directly related to this abuse, with Guilt Hulk even taking the form of Bruce's father before becoming this thing. This Hulk is incredibly powerful, and it took the combined efforts of many of Bruce's other alter egos to hold and keep the Guilt Hulk persona repressed deep in Bruce's mind. Number 5, Pappy Banner. If you've never read the Old Man Logan storyline, I'm gonna warn you now, it is graphic. In this storyline, almost all of the other heroes are dead, and the villains rule, holding various different kingdoms. But Hulk is still here, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Years and years of gamma exposure affected him, making him more and more villainous. This Hulk, referred to as Pappy Banner, has claimed a large part of America, which includes California, as his own. He also has a gang now, but these aren't just normal gang members, no. These guys are all the interbred children of the Hulk and his cousin, Jennifer Walters, otherwise known as She-Hulk. When members of this gang murder his new family for fun, Wolverine goes on a crazed rampage, killing almost all the members of the Hulk family, including She-Hulk. The Old Man Bruce and Old Man Logan end up facing off until Bruce transforms into the Hulk, who is massive compared to his normal 616 self. Like 3 stories tall massive. He also really let himself go. Just saying. The Jumbo Hillbilly Hulk swallowed Logan whole, prompting Logan to cut his way out of the Hulk. Number 4, Infernal Hulk. On Earth 11638, Bruce Banner was kind of sick of dealing with the raging and the rampaging of the Hulk. So, when Spider-Man introduced Bruce to Stephen Strange, he became his apprentice and learned how to separate himself from the Hulk entity by sending it to hell and making it a demon. It worked though, except for when the 616 Hulk, along with Deadpool and Spider-Man, came to this 11638 Earth. The Infernal Hulk managed to enter back into the realm of Earth, swapping places with 616 Earth's Hulk persona. Infernal Hulk went after Sorcerer Supreme Bruce Banner, who was saved by both Deadpool and Spider-Man. How did they defeat this demon Hulk though? Well, Dr. Bruce reversed the banishing spell that sent Hulk to hell, and just before Infernal Hulk could return to his body, Bruce had his neck snapped, killing him, obviously. But his spirit lived on in the astral plane, so it's all good. Hey big guys, sun's getting real low. Oh, wait, no, we still gotta do the top 3. Well hey, now that you're here, why not give us a like and a subscribe? If you're enjoying the video, that is. It would really help us out. We don't get strong with rage, we get strong with your support. Okay, I'm sorry y'all. Let's just get on with the video, okay? Number 3, Null, Breaker of Worlds. Ever thought that Hulk should get a hammer like Thor? No? Me neither. But it is awesome. When Kal Borsun the Serpent sent down 7 magical hammers that represented his 7 followers to Earth, the hammer Null found its way to our lovely green friend, transforming him into Null, the Breaker of Worlds. Hulk/Null went a-smashing, rampaging all over South America, bringing him into conflict with the Avengers, who he defeated, and eventually with a solo Thor. When fighting Thor, Null teamed up with Angrier, Breaker of Souls, which was Ben Grimm the Thing, who was defeated by Thor. But we all know who is the strongest Avenger, don't we? Null was easily too powerful for Thor, and instead of facing him one-on-one, the God of Thunder threw Hulk into orbit. He landed in Transylvania and started taking on Dracula and his minions. It was only after Inca, disguised as Betty Ross, showed up that Hulk threw the hammer aside and left, wanting to be alone. Number 2, Worldbreaker Hulk. Now, it's fair to say that Worldbreaker Hulk deserves the top spot on this list, but I mean, gosh, I just don't think he's that evil. I'm kind of on his side. I cannot lie, but he still gets the number 2 spot because the level of power of this version of Hulk is insane. Near the end of the Planet Hulk storyline, the shuttle he was sent to Sakaar in blows up, killing the Green Scar's wife and children. Hulk reaches a whole new level of anger, which is directed at those who sent him here, the Illuminati. And so, he headed to Earth with his Warsworn. He made a quick stop at the moon though to defeat Black Bolt of the Inhumans. When he got to Earth, he headed to New York, giving the city a time limit to be evacuated. And when that time limit stopped, well, he defeated everyone who was left. Iron Man and the Hulkbuster armor, the Avengers plus their tower, the US Army, the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Juggernaut, Doctor Strange using the power of Zom, who, if you don't know who Zom is, you should go watch the top 10 most powerful Doctor Strange villains videos. It's insane. And Ghost Rider, all while saving the innocent bystanders. He then threw the Illuminati members he captured into the ring against each other, sparing them as he only sought justice, not murder. He was eventually sorta defeated by the Sentry, who he fought until they both reverted back to their human forms, which is when Bruce Banner knocked out Bob Reynolds. So look, if you haven't read this story, please do it. Number 1, Ultraman. In the universe of Earth 3, things are a little turned upside down. Instead of being driven by the morals of good versus evil, the people of this universe are inspired by strength above all else. I can't really relate. Born on a dying Krypton where Kryptonians evolved to be empowered by green kryptonite to a maniacal version of Jor-El aptly named Jor-Il, baby Kal-Il is jettisoned off to Earth. But instead of the classic morals, he's instead inspired by his father to become the strongest possible being with absolutely no weaknesses in himself and the others around him. When Kal lands on the farm of Johnny and Martha Kent, he uses pieces of green kryptonite to empower himself and forces the dysfunctional couple to be his parents until the totally mature age of 7, when he murders them both and sets the farm ablaze. Eventually, this self-proclaimed Ultraman murders the President of the United States of America and takes control of the world, creating the crime syndicate of America with other evil alternate versions of classic characters, including an evil Wonder Woman, Superwoman, and evil version of Batman, Owlman, who have a pretty toxic love triangle.
At number 9 is when Angel goes evil. Angel was always my favorite of the X-Men, and he doesn't get brought up too often on this channel. So, here we are. Everything starts going downhill for Warren Worthington when his wings are amputated in an attempt to save his life. When this happens, Angel goes into a deep depression, having lost his primary source of power, flight. But good thing he's got a jet. So he takes off to try and feel that sweet, sweet air once more. But of course, he can't even have that. The jet is sabotaged by Cameron Hodge and it explodes. Everyone thinks Angel dies here, but he's actually teleported away and saved by Apocalypse. This is where he goes bad. And yes, it's because he's brainwashed, sort of, but it could also be argued that Angel had a lot of anger built up that made him susceptible to this transformation due to the whole wings clipping thing. Either way, DM me and let me know if you agree or not. At number 8, we've got Reed Richards turning into the Maker. This turn to the dark side takes place in the Ultimate Universe, where the superheroes are sort of more serious, gritty versions of themselves. And when Reed proposes to Sue Storm and is rejected, he gets pretty close to the edge. But when Kang comes from the future and tells Reed that he's the only one who can save the Ultimate Universe, he makes it his duty to do some pretty nasty stuff, including killing his own family and faking his own death. And when the heroes catch on to this, they naturally take him out by throwing him into the negative zone. But when the Ultimates, the Avengers of this universe, realize the prophecy is true, they turn to Reed to save the universe. And, spoiler alert, they find out that it wasn't Reed, but Reed and Sue's son Franklin who would have to be the key to saving the universe. But Franklin was never born, because Sue rejected Reed. So boom goes that universe. Sad.
Number 7, Moon Knight. Moon Knight is known for being a hero or anti-hero in the Marvel Universe, but unfortunately, there's a lot going on in his mind, which means he hasn't always acted as a hero. In fact, the being that granted him his power may also be his dark side, or bring out a dark side in Moon Knight, or Mark Spector at least. It has been insinuated before that Khonshu is another persona residing within Mark Spector's psyche, who is somewhat of a manipulator, but in some ways represents Mark's lack of control or desire to self-sabotage. However, even if we consider what presently seems more likely, that Khonshu is of course his own separate entity, Khonshu was also the one who almost succeeded in using Moon Knight to turn the Earth into his own underworld, having Moon Knight steal artifacts of power from the Avengers to use them to defeat Mephisto, but only so that Khonshu might reign in his place. Yikes. Moon Knight's dark persona has a name, and it is, or was at least, Khonshu. Number 6. Red Hood. Jason Todd is a character who is familiar with darkness. He has suffered through quite a bit of trauma and tragedy, and as a result it shaped his character, corrupting him somewhat and turning him dark. Initially, Jason Todd was known as Batman's second Robin, but over time he became more and more rebellious and eventually chose to basically break off and set it on his own. This only led to more problems when Jason found his birth mother, but then was seemingly betrayed by her and then brutally killed by the Joker. And all of that after shortly reconnecting with Batman. Ooh. Years later we would learn that he had returned, but feeling that Batman had abandoned him after his suspected death, became the villain known as Red Hood, breaking the rules of heroism that Batman had taught him. Jason to this day is always a character who struggles to find the light at times on a path of darkness that he treads. And even when acting as a hero, there is a darkness within him that seems to linger, and at times even comes to the surface. Number 5. Professor X. Even someone as celebrated as Professor X has a dark side, and actually, the more we've gotten to know him, the more this makes quite a bit of sense. The darker and darker it seems to have gotten for Professor X. One of the first major revelations when it came to Professor X's dark side was with the villain Onslaught. Onslaught initially was this mysterious psychic villain in the comics who, despite seeming like a mashup of Magneto and Professor X when it came to his abilities and his appearance, everyone was still surprised to find out that he in fact was a mashup of Magneto and Professor X. Gasp! More specifically, Onslaught represents the repressed darker parts of Charles' psyche, which he kinda locked away but later were released when he broke Magneto's mind, in essence absorbing it. Although at the time, I don't think he really knew he did that. Magneto's mind connected with Charles' darker side, and Onslaught was born. And really, this was just the beginning of readers learning about the darker aspects of Charles Xavier, which overall I think adds quite a bit of depth to his character. Number 4. Enchantress. Enchantress is an interesting one. I feel like we generally think of her as more of a villain, but she's definitely way more complicated than that. To be clear, we're talking about the Enchantress of DC, aka June Moon. June Moon became the Enchantress initially in the comics after being given magical power by a being known as Zamor. In reality, this power was granted to June Moon by merging her with an evil entity known as the Succubus. With her newfound power, she would transform into a green-eyed, raven-haired woman whenever she activated her abilities, transforming back to the blonde-haired, blue-eyed June Moon thereafter. At least initially back in the New Earth continuity, June actually acted as a hero in her Enchantress guise, defeating evil and saving her paramour's life. Unfortunately, she quickly became more anti-hero in terms of her adventures and motives, and then just basically became like straight up villainous from there. At times it has seemed Enchantress struggles when it comes to her alignment. Sometimes she would act heroically, but on a dime she would turn to the side of evil with her behavior. This is because of the struggle within her likely between the Succubus and June in terms of their own desires. Or, in Primar's continuity, the struggle between June and Enchantress, who is simply her own magical entity who is merged with June.
At number 4, we've got Captain America. Now, there are a couple events that can be explored where Captain America changes sides, one of which being Civil War and the other being Secret Empire. The Civil War example is much like Cyclops' case, where he doesn't clearly go evil, but he does actively decide to take a stance against his former allies. The Secret Empire storyline, however, shows him definitely going to the dark side, but this isn't actually him, but a sleeper agent with allegiances to Hydra. For the purposes of this list, the Civil War example seems to fit better because it's a stance Cap feels like he needs to take for what, as he sees, the greater good. But it still isn't that evil. All I know is that when Cap mutters "Hail Hydra," it leaves a much more sinister taste in our mouths than him taking a stance against the Sokovia Accord. But let me know over on Instagram which one you think is a more legitimate turn to the dark side for Captain America. Alright, at number 2 we have Scarlet Witch. First introduced as what appears to be a villain, Scarlet Witch is revealed to actually be good, and she joins the Avengers. Even though she does become one of the most powerful of the group, it may have been a mistake for her new allies to trust her perceived goodness so openly. It's not that she was faking it, but considering what ends up taking place, it could be argued that there was a decent amount of evil hiding right underneath the surface. During the event Avengers Disassembled, Wanda loses all her cool when she learns that her 2 sons are parts of the Devil's Soul. This naturally enrages her and she takes it out on the Avengers. and she doesn't pull her punches either, actually killing Hawkeye, Vision, and Scott Lang. Finally, at number 1, we have the one we all know, Superman's turn to evil in the Injustice storyline. This is a pretty popular event and very significant as well, involving such a powerful hero as Superman, so I figured it needed to be put at number 1. For those who don't know, this turn that Superman takes is a result of him being tricked into killing Lois Lane and destroying all of Metropolis with a nuclear bomb. Yikes. It's Joker's final trick, and it's a doozy because it is enough to turn Superman against his own philosophies and resort to killing as a means of justice. He starts by taking out Joker there and then, but continues his reign of evil by recruiting other heroes to join him on his path of destruction. What makes this turn so crazy and memorable is that Superman isn't entranced by any otherworldly possession or under the spell of some kind of enchantment. He himself has justified his own evil actions. He truly feels in this moment, and forevermore, that he has no choice but to become evil, and convince some others to join him too.
Number 10, Wither. Kevin Ford, or better known as Wither, was a former student of Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. He was a mutant with the power of organic decay, which means basically when he touched any form of organic matter, it would break down the binding forces between the molecules and cause whatever he's touching to wither away. I get his name now. He wasn't really all that great at controlling it though. When he first arrived at the school, he was a bit of a loner, but he eventually made some friends. He was especially close with Laurie Collins, also known as Wallflower. Years later, during the House of M storyline, he touched Laurie's arm and accidentally ended up crippling her. He then decided to run away and was recruited by Selene to fight against the X-Men. Number 9, Bishop. Lucas Bishop, or better known as just Bishop, has a very, very interesting story. You see, his mission was to travel back and to find a traitor in the X-Men and stop this terrible future that he was living in. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, not exactly. After Scarlet Witch wiped out a ton of the mutant population, Hope Summers appeared, and everyone saw her as some sort of mutant messiah. Bishop then realizes that she is partially responsible for the terrible future that he lives in and will stop at nothing to kill her. He even ends up betraying the X-Men, which in turn makes him realize that he is the traitor that he was looking for all along. And instead of killing Hope, he ends up killing Cable. And now, in the future, he is known as a villain. That's pretty crazy. And really messed up. Number 8, Colossus. Colossus is generally seen as a really nice guy. I mean, look how he's portrayed in the Deadpool films. People just absolutely love him. But unfortunately, he has turned to the dark side. He ended up suffering a brain injury, and then shortly after, he lost his sister to something known as the Legacy Virus, which took the lives of a lot of mutants. Because of this, he ends up siding with Magneto for a little while and goes against the X-Men. But he does eventually return to the side of good. But he was evil, which is why he is on this list.
Okay, at number 7, we have Bucky Barnes. Harkening back to World War II, Captain America and Bucky Barnes are teammates on the battlefield, zeroing in on Nazi scientist Baron Heinrich Zemo. But they're knocked unconscious in a battle with Zemo, and they're awakened just in time to try and catch up to a stolen ally plane that's taking off. As they catch up to it, only Bucky is able to hold on as it flies away, and Cap falls into the English Channel. But lucky for him, because the plane explodes, seemingly killing Bucky. But he isn't actually killed. After this, Bucky is fished out of the water by the Soviets with one arm missing. He's indoctrinated to hate the West and turned into the Winter Soldier. This is done all against his will, and he has no recollection of his old self and his prior allegiances, so it's not really his fault, but he goes evil nonetheless. At number 6 is Jean Grey turning into Dark Phoenix. This is probably one of the earliest examples of a superhero going bad that I can remember witnessing as a kid. Although this is an instance of Phoenix Force basically brainwashing Jean, I figured it would be blasphemy to leave Dark Phoenix off the list. Jean Grey is an extremely powerful telepath that exceeds all of Professor X's expectations, so when she is consumed by Phoenix Force, she becomes one of the most powerful and unstoppable forces in all of the cosmos. She traverses galaxies, absorbing energy from stars as she goes, and in turn takes out masses of life on various planets in what can only be described as super selfish of her. Throughout her time as Dark Phoenix, she has no recollection of her former self or even a proper sense of reality, so It's not really Jean Grey anymore, but something much more sinister. At number 5, we have Superboy Prime. This is one of the most significant cases of a superhero going evil because the cost of this turn is one of the most significant in any comic storyline, Marvel, DC, or otherwise. Superboy Prime is born on Earth Prime in the same way as Superman, landing in a cornfield, being named Clark, all that hubbub. Except Earth Prime is part of a dimension that doesn't have any superheroes in it, except for Superboy. He's the only one. And when a multiversal catastrophe takes place that destroys hundreds of different worlds, Superboy teams up with a group of superheroes to try and save as many as they can. Basically, as you can guess, his homeworld, Earth Prime, is not saved in this process. And even during another process where they're able to create an Earth with an amalgam of 5 different Earths' histories, Superboy's is not one of those 5 either. So, to keep the story short, this basically drives Superboy into a jealous rage that he never really gets out of. It's a really sad story actually, and given Superboy Prime's insane level of power, it causes immeasurable harm to the cosmos for years after.
Number 3, Angel. Warren Worthington III is a mutant, well, with, you guessed it, wings. He's a proud member of the X-Men, but ended up becoming their enemy, Archangel. He becomes one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen. He did eventually break free from Apocalypse, but the whole encounter really just changed him going forward. Warren was never really the same after that. He has consistently wavered between good and evil, sometimes going back and referring to himself as Angel, and then other times becoming bad and becoming Archangel. Number 2, Wolverine. Wolverine becoming bad isn't really a new thing. I mean, there have been multiple instances in the comics where Wolverine has become evil. During the Age of Apocalypse storyline, where he was one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen, or the time where his body was taken over by a demon and he became Wolverine and caused all sorts of mayhem, or there's even the time where he became a vampire. He also even murdered a kid in the Ultimate Universe. It's just, the list goes on and on. But at the same time, that doesn't take away from how iconic Logan is. He's just this amazing hero and will always stay that way, regardless, if he turns evil sometimes. Number 1, Jean Grey. This is probably one of, if not the most famous story in X-Men history, the Dark Phoenix Saga. Fans adore it. It was this massive, action-packed, heartbreaking event. I mean, it's so popular that they've even tried to make it into 2 movies. Fans weren't really crazy about them, but the fact that it was adapted twice really shows you how popular it is. Jean Grey becomes Dark Phoenix after harnessing the power of the Phoenix Force, one of the most powerful things in the whole Marvel universe. This tragic tale also does not have a happy ending. I mean, on the one hand, Jean managed to become herself again, but in order for her to save everyone, she had to die, which had massive ramifications on the rest of the team going forward.
Number 10, Iron Man. I know that Iron Man has saved and helped to save the Earth and universe many times over, but even he has a darker side. This version of Iron Man was known as Superior Iron Man, and this persona took hold following the events of Axis, when basically everyone's dark side was brought to the surface as major heroes and villains of Marvel had their alignments flipped. Thanks, by accident, to Scarlet Witch. Well, Scarlet Witch was actually trying to do something good, and she did do that, but this just kind of happened as a result. Oh, Wanda, always with the magic and the chaos. When everything was set right once more, however, Iron Man managed to shield himself from the reversal back to his original alignment, being the smart and evil man that he was at the time. And so for a while thereafter, he got to continue being evil in his series, Superior Iron Man. Number 9, The Flash. Usually we see the Flash as a hero, especially the current Flash, Wally West, except for the time when, for some reason, it was felt that he should play a villain instead. As in Heroes in Crisis, where Wally basically snapped due to the universe being reset with New 52 and him remembering the previous continuity, his family, and his own place in it. Now granted, this wasn't specifically a persona of Wally's, more just a breaking point for the hero that briefly turned him into a villain. But in Future State we did see a darker side to the character explored once more when he becomes one of the 4 horsemen and is possessed by the entity known as Famine. As Famine, Wally even preys on other speedsters, and seemingly succeeds in breaking their connection to the Speed Force, and even killing a good number of them, and in the end, kind of all of them. I mean, he turns Barry into a ghost. Fortunately, Future State is now basically an alternate world, an alternate future, and this aspect of it will likely not come to pass in the main continuity, which means Wally is free to get his family back and keep being the good guy that we know him to be. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this channel and you want to support us in other ways, you can go and check out our Facebook. We just relaunched ourselves over there, and it is awesome, so head on over, hit that like, helps us out, thank you. Number 8, Homelander. Homelander might be one of the main villains of The Boys, both the comic series and television adaptation, but he's also somehow still not the worst of the worst, if you can believe that. He poses as a hero, but is really not the greatest. But that being said, he also has an evil clone who is much worse than he is. In fact, many of the most terrible acts that we associate with Homelander in the comics are revealed to have been acts committed by his evil clone version. Well, I don't think the television series plans to follow suit in this regard. In the comics, this evil clone of himself turns out to be Black Noir, whose face we never see, and in the television series, whose voice we never hear. And even in the comics, he's known for being very quiet. So not only does Homelander have the false hero persona that he often wears in front of the public, but he also has a much darker yet separate side in his evil clone, Black Noir. And I would say in comparison to Black Noir, Homelander is basically a superhero because Black Noir is literally the worst in the comics. It's really bad.
Number 6, Iceman. In the Age of Apocalypse universe, Bobby Drake, aka Iceman, is not the one we know and love. In the original universe, he's, a nice guy that you could just rely on. He's a crucial part of the X-Men and has saved hundreds of people. But that's not the case in the Apocalypse timeline. This Bobby ends up turning against his team, to the point where he even reveals the location of the X-Men's super secret underwater base to Wolverine, who was also working for Apocalypse at the time. Not cool, Bobby. Not cool. Although he didn't really get away with it. Later on, he ended up being killed by Nightcrawler. So, Number 5, Namor. Namor has a very interesting relationship with people who live on land. And by interesting, I mean it's pretty rocky. He usually is not a fan of them, although he has worked with them, before, and even allowed the X-Men to operate in the ocean. But that hasn't always been the case. He has consistently let his hatred of the land cloud his judgment, to the point where he has had multiple fights with not only just the X-Men, but the Avengers. He also has a lot of beef with Tony Stark, aka Iron Man. The two have had so many fights that I have lost count.
Number 2, Raven. Raven is a hero who very evidently has a dark side. It comes from her father's side. Trigon is both a powerful demon and Raven's dad, and the darkness within herself she gets from him. And I think he also could be an alien. I think that's also one of his origins. Evil alien. He sired many offspring with the hopes of spreading his power and his mission of destruction, because he was trapped at the time. His goal was to, in essence, destroy worlds with his children, who likely all felt a pull towards darkness, because they're his children, Raven included. Raven is therefore typically depicted as being a hero who is somewhat monotone, due to the fact that she needs to keep her emotions in check. This is because if she gets too emotional, it can actually cause her dark side to emerge and take control of her. So instead, everything she does, says, and feels must be controlled and calculated so that she doesn't wake the monster that sleeps within herself. And we've seen what happens in the comics when Raven's dark side does take control, and let me tell you, it's pretty scary stuff. Fun fact, I'm pretty sure Wally West is scarred for life from Raven's dark side. Number 1, Sentry. Sentry's evil persona was so bad that he in effect had to be wiped from the minds of everyone on planet Earth, including his own mind. The Sentry is the greatest superhero the world forgot in Marvel Comics, and the world had to forget him because Bob Reynolds wasn't just the Sentry, but was also one of the greatest and most powerful villains to have ever lived. The Void. With the realization that they too were one and the same, the only way the heroes who knew this figured they could defeat the Void without killing Reynolds, who was a close friend to many of them, was to simply make sure that everyone forgot who the Sentry was, allowing Robert to also forget, and in essence preserving the good deeds as well that he had done, even though no one of course would remember who he was. And without the extreme good of the Sentry, there would also no longer exist the extreme evil of the Void. Problem solved. For a time this worked and Bob went back to being a regular old Joe, forgetting about his previous life. But one day, he began to remember again, which allowed the Sentry to return, but also brought the Void back with him. And that's also when we found out who he was, because we also forgot, us readers. Oh, retcons. That's actually a really fun retcon though, I do like that one.